Islam Moors. I'm Daoud Habib Alamen, Wazir of Lodium Moorish, Paredio Monte, Colorado. Tonight I wanted to share a little something with you I know you're all pretty familiar with, but why not read it again? Because the prophet did say, study, study, study. We're going to go to this quote. I'm going to leave the European here just long enough to teach you how to run a government. Now, what did he mean by that? Leave the European here just long enough to show you how to run a government. Well, if we take that statement literally, we can use the European just like he's been using us. Just this week, I went down to the state capitol, did a nice little tour and pressed some of the flesh, introduced myself to the people down there. Colorado State Senate, Colorado House, and they've got a lot of information that's readily available. And it's basically an instruction manual for you to use to help you to get your government started. Secondly, you can go to any of these House or Senate meetings, sit down, take it all in, meet some people, wear your fez, and demonstrate in the right manner. We don't necessarily want to demonstrate when it's a situation where there's some animosity. We must remember that the Treaty of Peace and Friendship is a contract, right? It's got two parties, the Sultan of Morocco and the U.S. Corporation. Now, in that, just because it's a treaty, just because it's a contract, doesn't mean that we have to be belligerent. It doesn't mean that we have to be aggressive. It doesn't mean that we have to have any ill will or intention towards these individuals. We can just use them as a study guide. Go in, learn what we need to learn, retain it, take it back to our state provincial governments and use it just like they're using it. And why not? It's what the prophet said. He said, I'm going to leave the European here just long enough to teach you how to run a government. So let's use them. Let's demonstrate. Let's take our matriarchs down to the state capitol, sit amongst the pews and watch them conduct their business. Because again, this is only going to help us train ourselves to conduct our business in the same like manner. And in that way, we can reclaim our rightful heirship. And we can return to the entire submission of Moroccan law by using them to help us to train our members, our matriarchs, our senior patriarchs, and everybody that's involved in the government step by step. Why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? That's not what the prophet said. But again, we've got to look at some of the profound things that the prophet had given us some 110 years ago, this being almost 2023, and that being 1913. We've got to take some of these lessons, these profound statements that he's made, and re-examine them and put them under our scrutiny and see how best to implement the things that he said were going to come to pass in the years following. In my tour at the state capitol, I came across all these pamphlets, the Centennial State Guideline for Lobbyists, State Guide to the State Gallery Guide, Public Participation in a Legislative Hearing, Public Participation, the Colorado Legislative Directory, what is this, the Colorado State Senate, it's just like a picture book, fun facts about the state Senate, And another little interesting nugget, and this is again in this chartered colony construct, but this is an illustration of how a bill becomes a law in their jurisdiction. And it takes you step by step through all the processes, being introduced, going to committee, going from the House to the Senate, and finally being voted in. But again, these are some of the tools that we can utilize to our advantage by not trying to reinvent the wheel, by understanding that just like you would go to a library, it's information, free information for you to use and for you to better yourselves and for you to implement and upgrade your state governments. And I do want to make this note, a side note. Why don't we make it a practice of demonstrating outside of controversy, demonstrating outside of situations that may involve policy enforcers? Why don't we make ourselves a permanent part of their landscape? Because you're introducing your legislation and your bills to them, you're sending their writs and affidavits to them. They know you by name. Why not introduce yourself? Because again, this is a long-term 50-year lease that we're in, right? So there's no reason that we should just send paperwork and for them to look at it and throw it over their shoulder and have to deal with it when they feel like dealing with it. What should happen is we should introduce a legislation and then follow that up with a visit. I'm the appointed office that you happen to be sitting in. Who wrote that legislation? I'd like to introduce myself to you. Because this is a working relationship. This is a relationship that we should be cultivating for the long term. Because what are we after? Sovereignty and independence, integrity of domain, and economic liberty without any inequality. Sovereignty and independence being defined as the formation and protection of sustainable freedom. Equality and justice in society depends totally on the exact sense of establishment of national sovereignty. Therefore, the basis of freedom, equality, and justice is national sovereignty. Freedom in our society and in all our state is limitless. Sovereignty and independence begins with a flag, a seal, elections, public inaugurations. Lest we forget Constitution. Constitution, accession to international declarations, conventions, and treaties. Ratification and promulgation. Those are the steps to sovereignty and independence. Integrity of domain. Integrity of domain is peace. Peace of mind, peace of body, peace of spirit. Being centered in oneself and understanding that you are in your homeland, that you are Aboriginal, autochthonous, and that you belong. You are no longer a subject, a protege, a Negro, a black, a colored. You're no longer dead in the eyes of the law. It is your government's job to give you a jurisdiction to call your own, to be safe and secure, to raise your family, to do commerce. That's the job of your government, to secure that on your behalf, to secure your integrity of domain, to put your name on the list of protected Moors, to notify the Secretary of State that yes, Muhammad or Abdul or even Kindred is a protected Moor under Allodium Moorish Paradium ante Colorado. Economic liberty without any inequality. The liberal free market viewpoint defines economic liberty as a freedom to produce, trade, and consume any goods and services acquired without the use of force, fraud, theft, or government regulation. The key ingredients of economic freedom are personal choice, voluntary exchange, freedom to compete in markets, and protection of personal property. So economic liberty without any inequality is a right to contract or not to contract, to have a choice in that matter, without the use of force, fraud from a chartered colony, theft by taxation, or undue government regulation, which their licenses and any of that oversight, you might say, any of that oversight would be considered regulation. It is these three principles, sovereignty and independence, integrity of domain, and economic liberty without any inequality, that we must focus on in the here and now and the right now, and that not in the tomorrow, in the this is going to directly affect Moore's pockets today, removing them from a belligerent jurisdiction, removing the taxation, removing the regulation, their regulation, and removing any obstacle or encumbrance that might get in the way of a Moor being able to freely contract or to not contract, to buy goods and services from each other, whether it's buy, barter, however we decide to conduct business in your Moorish state, however that is, whatever that looks like. All this begins with a constitution. A constitution is a contract binding the individuals of the state to a set of principles. A constitution is a legal agreement to conduct oneself by the parameters set forth. A constitution gives the state integrity. It outlines and defines what things are going to be permitted and what things are not going to be permitted, how your government is structured from the top down. And our government is matriarchal led, so legislative branch being at the top, the executive branch being in the middle, and the judicial branch to outline everything and to keep everybody between the lines, making sure that they abide by the Constitution, abide by the internal laws. And there's one more thing that I observed that came to mind when I was doing my tour of the Capitol. Everyone there did not have the same views. And not to belabor this, but again, there are Democrats, there are Republicans, there are independents. And as we are constituted Moors, there are temple Moors, civic Moors, and unconscious Moors. And I'm drawing that comparison to have you understand that these Europeans operate in that venue, making laws, conducting business, and it coexisting. It's not necessary for us to win everybody over. It's not necessary to convert everybody to your exact same way of thinking. If you look at the way the charter colonists are running their government, it's basically a three-party system where you have your, again, Republicans, your Democrats, and your independents. There has to be a peaceful way to coexist and agree to disagree, but still move the ball forward. Because again, what we're trying to do is get the estate back. We're trying to reclaim our rightful place among the affairs of men, among the affairs of men. That can't happen if we can't peacefully coexist as Moors. So again, study, 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 Moors. Use what they give you. Take all their lessons, read all their books. Understand, Moors, what they think they've done to us, they've done for us. Study, study, study. And again, Allah alone is perfect. Islam.